Hello, I am Beth and I am in a park, and today's live is for anyone who feels like they struggle with doubting if their relationship will last, doubting whether they should stay in their relationship. It's for anyone who feels like, you know what, things can be going really well and then you have a setback and then you start to doubt it all. It's like you don't have a very strong foundation. So I have an incredible guest who's going to be joining us soon. I'm just going to have you request to join, Sarah. Sarah is an expert at all things doubts in relationships. She's a trauma-informed relationship anxiety coach whose mission is to help you feel more confident in your relationship. I'm just going to click to go the not so glamorous parts of a romantic relationship. So here we go, Sarah. There we go. Sarah, welcome.
Hi, how's it going?
I'm good. How's your day going?
It's been good, thank you.
Awesome. So we're here to talk about the topic, how to overcome doubts in your relationship. And if the wind gets too much, let me know. I'm just sitting in a park right now.
I would definitely mute when you're not speaking.
Okay.
It is a little bit noisy.
Is it getting too noisy? Okay. You know what? I'm going to see. Let's see. Is it really windy sounding?
Whenever you're not speaking, you can definitely hear it. But
okay, I'm going to head to my car.
Okay.
Let's talk. So let's talk about, just say things are going really well and all of a sudden they're not going so well and you start to doubt your relationship. I'm going to walk and talk.
Yes, that's perfect. Well, let me quickly just introduce those who may not know who I am. My name is Sarah Yenkin, and I am a relationship anxiety coach. And my goal, oh,
Are you still there?
yeah, do you want to mute really quick?
How do I mute? Oh, right here.
Awesome. There we go. I think that the wind was getting a little windy. So I support people who are having doubts in their loving and safe relationships. We don't focus on abusive relationships in my work. And I help people learn how to kind of move through some of the doubt and anxiety that they may be experiencing, which may be a result of fears in their relationship. It may be a result of just having old beliefs around love and relationships that may no longer be serving them. And it may be because of actual things happening in the relationship that people need to kind of decide, okay, well, is this thing that is bothering me or challenging me? Is this something that is more of an inconvenience and that I can learn to live with? Or is this thing something that actually makes our relationship potentially incompatible? So that's kind of what I help people understand. And I think there's definitely a difference between doubts about a relationship because there's something that's going against maybe your values or beliefs versus something that's actually tied to fear.
Amazing. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So let's just start with the first piece. Like, I deal a lot with women who are in marriages. So a lot of times the doubt really creeps in. Like, we're not in the dating stage anymore. We're like things aren't going well, or you're on a roller coaster of like cycles of things are going well, then they dip down and not going well. And it's like the trust isn't there that this is actually going to work out. The foundation has some cracks in it. And so every time things go bad, all of a sudden your mind goes to, this isn't going to last, or I don't know if I want this to work, or how do we walk me through this, like maybe cycle that happens, or how you can start to overcome some of the doubts when these cycles happen.
Yeah. So I would say the first important piece about that is what you mentioned, that sometimes when things are not going well, we automatically jump to, well, this might not work. And that belief in itself is a little bit faulty. And I know why it happens though, because a lot of us have seen maybe marriages that didn't work out. Or we worry, like if you argue in a relationship because we either saw it or we never saw it, then that means that fighting is not good, or we can't disagree and then repair and move forward. But I think one of the things that we need to adjust while being in a relationship is normalizing that it's okay to have discussions and disagreements, and for not everything to be perfect and rosy 24/7. That doesn't mean that you're in a bad relationship. Of course, maybe if, you know, you're fighting every single day, 25 times, and like you can't seem to have any sort of logical or like stable conversations about something, and there's no seeing the other person's side, we don't necessarily want that, right? Everyone has their threshold and their limit. But I think that we need to normalize challenges in a relationships and not think that that means we have to leave. And that's like one of the first things I would say in response to that question. But then secondly, beyond that, we can also learn how to, of course, communicate our needs and better discuss things within the relationship so that those types of occurrences don't feel so frequent, and maybe try and come to some sort of compromise or understanding when there is a consistent pattern coming up that makes you doubt something in your relationship. Because I think a lot of times we don't even explore why we're having these doubts in the first place. Instead of trying to like discuss it with our partner, we may just think, oh, well, this must mean they're not they're not right for me, or something's wrong here, instead of trying to understand the root of why this is all starting.
Yeah. Okay. I have so many questions. Before we hop into like, how do you start to overcome some of these doubts? Let's just talk about why these doubts are there, because you said we may not even know why these doubts are creeping up. And one thing I can think of too is if you've never seen like disagreements within a marriage, like maybe your parents never fought, like whether that was healthy communication or not healthy communication, or you saw your parents have fights all the time and you could see that there wasn't a strong marriage, like even that can play into your scope of what a healthy marriage is and what healthy communication looks like. So let's talk a little bit about like relationships. This could be relationships or it could be marriage. So let's go into that, like our past and how it plays into our future relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, our past, and not even just our past experiences, but the past messages we've received about relationships can, of course, have a really big factor. So for me, like my parents got a divorce when I was in my early 20s, and that was old enough to like really understand what was going on. So I feel like even though it maybe didn't affect me in the same way as it might have for a younger child, because it didn't impact me for the same amount of time, I understood like what that meant. And then I kind of took it with me as I was in my relationship with Nate. I started realizing, oh, well, I don't want to get a divorce necessarily. Like no one necessarily wants, of course, that happens. Get a divorce. So you think about these things. And so that's one example. But of course, people have experiences from much younger in childhood of seeing arguing, or maybe they didn't see love in their parents' relationship. Or on the flip side, they saw a lot of love in their parents' relationship and needed to think about, okay, how do I mirror this? Or I need to make sure that my relationship is just as good as theirs. So basically, we can see any types of influences from family, friends, parents, and really soak in those messages. And then similarly, societal messages. So rom-coms or Disney movies, those have obviously impacted us. Or seeing, magazines of like this person got cheated on, by their partner, or just seeing all these fear-based stories about what can happen in love, while also simultaneously seeing that love should be this perfect fairy tale all the time. So it's like really hard to grapple with all these different messages and come up with our own meaning of what love should be like.
Oh, so true. So then what is love? Like I did an Instagram live with a guy recently, and love like isn't this passionate, intense, like over the moon type feeling. Like often it'll feel that way when you first start dating because of the hormones that are being induced, like the oxytocin that's coming out, which is a bonding hormone. But really love is stable. Love is stable, where you express your needs. Like, but let's talk about what is love so that we know what it is, so that we know what should love be. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny because I feel like this would be the same thing as like defining religion or defining spirituality. Like there's so many different definitions. So I definitely don't want to feel like I'm the one that is kind of sharing this, and someone needs to listen to my definition and have it be theirs. But I think people should reflect on what love means for them, because I don't think enough people do. One of the biggest things for me that I have found has been a myth is that love is just a feeling. And I don't believe that to be true. I think love is a series of actions and choices. It's about showing up and choosing the greater good of what serves yourself and the relationship, ideally. Hopefully, those two things are one and the same, or at least finding the balance between what is moving you forward and moving the relationship forward, because obviously we can love ourselves and we can love others, and that is made up of small actions and choices. It's not just that we feel in love 24/7 and that we get to have this blissful experience forever moving forward. If we just find the right partner, we still have to show up and choose to show up lovingly, choose to act lovingly. And that's not always easy to do. But for me, that has been something that has changed my version of what love means, because I know that even if I'm not feeling as loving, I can still show up and do something loving for myself or for Nate. And that will cultivate more of a sense of love in those moments. So that's like a small definition for me, that it's an action and choice, not a feeling. But that has been a big shift that I've made in the last few years.
Yeah, and I love how you brought up the self-love in there too. And self-love is a term that gets kind of thrown around. And again, what is self-love? I think we could take the same angle. Like, it's not just loving yourself, like a feeling, but it's the actions you take. And a lot of those actions you take are from a place of worth. And worth really is when you have all these lovely thoughts like I am worthy, I'm good enough, I am lovable, I'm really good at this, this, and this, and then you take action on it. It's like the sum of all your worth like thoughts, and then you put those into action. That's what self-love is. It's showing that you can take action and like hold those boundaries to others. But okay, let's go
Yeah. And
into, oh, go
one
ahead.
more
Yeah.
thing, sorry, I just thought of that made me think of is like self-love is not just loving the good parts of yourself, it's loving
Yes.
yourself for your full self. And I think that's really important for a relationship as well. It's not just loving the good parts about somebody or like trying to have everything be perfect. It's loving despite the imperfections and maybe even because of the imperfections, because we're imperfect too. And if we can't love ourselves, including our imperfections, then it's going to be really hard to accept imperfections in others, let alone love them. And so, a big part of the whole love journey for me has been just unwinding the belief that I have to be perfect and that my partner has to be perfect because there's no such thing. Like, we're all just imperfect humans and we have a lot of different parts to ourselves. So, just
Oh,
being more
yeah.
accepting of that.
I love that parts piece, and that's a whole nother topic too, like the parts therapy, like the Beth part that's like a mom, the Beth part that's an athlete, the Beth part that's a teacher, the one that's a wife, and the one within that even that starts to make mistakes or drops a dish on the floor or does things that maybe I would have been really upset as a kid because I want to please my parents and I didn't want them to get mad or but still loving those things. Because I find often when you judge yourself, that's not self-love, but it's because yeah, you're not loving yourself the way you need to. And often we're our hardest critics on ourselves. So I think it's really important, like you said, to love all parts or accept all parts as part of you. Okay, let's go on to doubts and types of doubts that people have in a relationship. Is it just the doubt that this isn't going to last, or are there other types of doubts in relationships?
Yeah, so the doubts that I primarily focus on are the questions such as, do I love this person enough? Am I settling? How can I be sure they are the one for me? But I know there's a whole other slew of doubts that people can have, such as, does this person love me enough? Or will this person leave me? And so it's interesting because a lot of these questions all tie back to similar core fears of like fear of abandonment, fear of loss, fear of change, fear of uncertainty. There's so many different fears that do come up in loving relationships because they are very vulnerable. They are scary. We don't have certainty, even though people like to say that you do have certainty or like when you know, you know. No one has certainty past what's happening right now. You can have confidence, but not certainty. And so there are many different types of doubts that can come up. And like I mentioned a little earlier, there can be doubts that are more so related to fears or your experiences or your beliefs. And those are the type of doubts I like to support people most with, just because that's what I experienced. But then, of course, there can be doubts that come up because of potential clashes in, values, or maybe one person believes something very strongly and the other person believes something else. And instead of respecting those differences, people are not able to accept or respect them. And so I actually will be talking about that specifically in more detail. I have a webinar coming up about like, is it anxiety or is it incompatibility? So I'm going to give people more to think through of that. But I do think it's really important for people to know that if you're having doubts, it doesn't mean that you necessarily can't be with this person or that it is an automatic incompatibility. It just means that you need to reflect a little bit more on some of these things that are coming up and ask yourself, like, why is this such a problem for me, or why is it making me have so much fear, and like process that either internally or within the relationship dynamic.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, just to backtrack a little, like, is it incompatibility or is it fear based? A thing that I like with fear is fear stands for false evidence appearing real. So when you can really break down the thoughts and the actions that are making your mind go to worst case scenario, write down the evidence for it. And so it's false evidence appearing real for anyone that wants to jot that one down. Okay, we had a question. Let's go back to this one. How can I notice the difference? So are my needs not being, when my needs aren't being met, am I just overreacting because of my anxious attachment? So how can you notice the
Mm,
difference?
mm. So I think that the interesting thing about all types of anxiety and all types of attachment is that they're not good or bad. So a lot of times I hear that type of question and people are kind of almost like blaming themselves for it. like, is it just my anxiety? That means like something's wrong with me. And there's nothing wrong with you. We all have needs and we all have different things that we're desiring from a relationship. So it's more so about like how you choose to communicate about it. I think that's more important than like, should you not have the need at all? Because no matter what, the need is still there. But the energy you bring into talking about it is what makes a difference. So, like, you didn't text me back fast enough is different than I've noticed that I am desiring to feel more connected to you when we spend time apart. Like, can we talk about how often we check in and communicate? You know, like there's just a different energy to that whole conversation. And so I don't think that we should try and be like changing our needs or worrying if the need is caused by anxiety or not, because the need is there. But what is the story we're telling ourselves about why we have that need? And then how are we choosing to communicate about it? Is it from a judgmental place that will lead to defensiveness? Or is it from a curious and compassionate place? So I don't necessarily help people as much with that type of question. I actually feel like the type of stuff that I focus more on is a little bit more towards like of the avoidant tendencies of like, oh my gosh, what if, you know, this person's infringing on me and like my life, instead of worrying if the other person is, you know, wanting to be with them. It's more like, do I even want to be with this person? So I tend to kind of think it's more on the avoidant side of things, but everyone has all parts of attachment within them and they can come out in different times. So
Yeah, what's amazing is when you're triggered to feel doubt. Doubt's like the surface issue. It's like the feeling, but underneath is so much bubbling underneath. And eventually it can get really fun to try and figure out, why do I feel this way? I know I don't like the way I feel, whether I can name the emotion or not. I just know I don't like it. So what is this emotion trying to tell me? It's incredible. If only the body would say, you are feeling doubt because X, Y, Z, but instead it has to tell you through a feeling. And so you have to recognize that and not ignore it, because it's going to keep coming back. And even if you do leave the relationship, that may even follow you, possibly, not always, depending on the circumstances. But a lot of times our fear will follow us, or those attachments, like you said, the avoidant attachment. So important to address this sooner than later, right?
yeah, absolutely. And I see a lot of questions coming in that are kind of slightly off of the initial topic that we're
Yeah.
talking about. Not necessarily off topic, but I think we could go in so many directions. And so I encourage anyone with the questions here just to make sure you're following my page, and stay up to date with like my latest blogs and the webinar that I'm hosting coming up, because some of those questions will be answered or have already been answered before on my page. So just wanted to mention that.
All right, let's go into this one. What if you are experiencing doubts? Like, is it doubts or fears? And when do I know whether I should be telling my husband or my partner that I'm having these doubts about our relationship? And what if there's fear around triggering them? Because some people feel like, what if I tell them I'm worried about our relationship, and that might actually push them to leave? Like, some people don't want to out things because what if they're feeling the same thing and it actually pushes them in the wrong direction? So let's talk about this one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. And for anyone who has that question as well, I will explain it, but I also did write a blog post that will give you even a script to kind of bring forward to your partner. So it's called Telling Your Partner About Relationship Anxiety. But some of the key things I talked about